So today, we're going to dig into a system, a really meticulously designed social architecture that allowed a convicted sex offender to operate at the absolute highest levels of global power. This isn't really a story about just one person. It's about the structure that made it all possible. Let's get into it. And really, this is the core question, isn't it? After a conviction that should have made him a total outcast, Jeffrey Epstein didn't just fade away. He came back. So how? I mean, what kind of social architecture even allows for something like that to happen?
To really understand this, we've got to focus on a very specific time frame, the decade right after his release from jail in 2009. This is the period when the architecture of his influence wasn't just holding on, it was being actively rebuilt, expanded, right up until the moment renewed public scrutiny brought the whole thing crashing down. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with what I'm calling the post-release paradox. Then we'll break down the three main pillars of his social architecture: his wealth, his use of science, and his creation of these exclusive social hubs. And finally, we'll see how all these pieces lock together to create a system that was just incredibly resilient. So let's just dive right into that central puzzle, the post-release paradox. How on earth does a convicted sex offender get back into the same rooms as presidents, Nobel Prize winners, and titans of industry? Well, it definitely wasn't an accident. It was a design.
The absolute bedrock of this design was Pillar 1, weaponizing wealth. You see, for Epstein, money wasn't just about yachts and mansions. No, it was a precision tool. It was a strategic weapon he used to systematically tear down social and ethical walls.
And the core tactic he used was something we're calling financial entanglement. This goes way beyond simple bribery. We're talking about a complex web of financial dependency where incredibly influential people found themselves subtly and sometimes not so subtly owing him. You can actually break this down into a pretty chilling four-step process. First, he'd pinpoint a strategic target, someone with real influence or access. Second, he'd get them tangled up, offering them special financial services or funding they couldn't get elsewhere. Third, this created a quiet sense of obligation, of dependency. And finally, boom, he'd leverage the access that he just created. It's a clinical, almost corporate strategy. And this quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. He wasn't playing the stock market in the traditional sense. His primary investment was in people. By weaving himself into the financial fabric of the powerful, he made himself seem essential. Okay, so now let's look at the second pillar and see how he built on top of this foundation. So that brings us to Pillar 2, science. If money opened the doors, science gave him a cloak of respectability to wear inside. He systematically used the prestige of places like Harvard and MIT and fields like theoretical physics to literally launder his reputation. The strategic goal here was plain and simple: reputation laundering. The logic is pretty straightforward, right? If the smartest people in the world and the most revered universities are all associating with you, well, how bad can you really be? It was a calculated play to borrow the credibility of the entire scientific elite. And just look at how he spread the money around. This wasn't a one-off donation. He spread his patronage across top-tier universities, independent research institutes, specific projects for prominent scientists, and even into science and tech startups. He was embedding himself across the entire ecosystem. And the tactics were so specific and so effective. Funding a professorship literally gets your name carved into the walls of the institution. Sponsoring conferences puts you right at the center of the conversation. And hosting these private intellectual salons with Nobel laureates, that creates this illusion that you're not just a donor, you're one of them, a peer. Okay, so let's recap. He's got access from his wealth, and he's got legitimacy from the world of science. The final piece of this puzzle, Pillar 3, was all about creating the physical spaces, the social hubs where he could bring his network together in environments that he, and only he, completely controlled. I mean, just think about the difference between a normal dinner party and one of his gatherings. You go to a party to socialize, right? To relax. His events were built for transactions. The guest list wasn't friends. It was curated for maximum influence. He'd bring a politician, a scientist, a banker, and a celebrity into the same room with himself right there in the middle of it all. And these are the stages where he made it all happen. The massive townhouse in Manhattan, the private jet, the infamous Caribbean island, that sprawling ranch out in New Mexico. These weren't just properties. They were strategic, private, controllable hubs for his network to operate in.
And at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. If you control the physical space where powerful people meet, you become the gatekeeper. You control the network. If you wanted access to that unique, curated mix of people he could bring together, you had to go through him. Period. So now, let's pull the camera back and look at the whole thing, the final structure. Because this is where you really see how truly resilient this architecture was. These pillars weren't just standing there on their own. They were designed to lean on each other, creating this incredibly stable and powerful system. This table lays it all out nice and clean. Wealth, through financial entanglement, bought him access and created obligation. Science, through reputation laundering, gave him legitimacy and credibility. And the social hubs, by making him the center of the network, gave him control and made him the ultimate gatekeeper. You see how each one feeds the others? And this is maybe the most important takeaway here. This wasn't a series of separate, disconnected tactics. It was a cycle. The scientific legitimacy made powerful people feel more comfortable taking his money. The access he got from his wealth allowed him to invite even more impressive people to his private hubs. And the exclusivity of those hubs made his financial and social backing seem even more valuable. It just kept feeding itself. And so this leaves us with a really big, kind of uncomfortable question. This social architecture wasn't built in a vacuum. It was built using the foundations of our own society. So the real question isn't just how did one man do this? It's what are the weaknesses in our own institutions, in finance, in academia, in the media, that allowed this to be built in the first place?